The testimonies shared on this podcast are told from the personal experience and perspective of the survivors. Not all legal outcomes are known or
A
final.
wish from the pastor is a royal command. It's basically something that you hear over, or I heard personally, and whoever was there with me heard over and over and over and over again, which just was to ingrain the philosophy that the pastor is the boss, period. There's one guy, and whatever he says goes, and whatever he thinks make happen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Skwarczynski, and I am the host of the Preacher Boys podcast. Welcome to episode number 2. I want to start off by thanking you for your support of the initial episode of this series and for your support of the Preacher Boys documentary project. I couldn't do any of this without your support, and it really means the world to me. I've received so many encouraging messages, calls, texts, and I can't thank all of you enough. Today's episode is with Stephen Thiel. Stephen was recruited into an IFB youth group when he was almost 15 and was groomed to be a, quote, preacher boy, preaching every chance he got in homeless shelters, detention centers, and services. He surrendered to a call of ministry on his life and committed full-time. He attended West Coast Baptist College, a ministry of Lancaster Baptist Church in Lancaster, California, and then served 8.5 years in 2 different independent fundamental Baptist churches. Stephen has since left the movement, so we talk quite a bit about the independent Baptist movement. We dig deep into the power structure that's found within Lancaster Baptist Church and West Coast Baptist College, and how his experience both in ministry and attending the college impacted his view of the movement, and what he thinks we can learn from his experience. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right into that interview. I think it's a really good one. And I'll go ahead and throw this out there. Even though this episode doesn't deal specifically with physical abuse, we are going to be talking, as we are with every episode, about abusive situations and abusive ministries, abusive leadership. And so I just want to issue just a trigger warning. All of these subjects are pretty difficult. Even the stories that maybe on paper aren't as extreme, for those of you who grew up in the movement, they may bring back some harsh memories. And so just be aware of that as we go into the episode. And I think that if we can listen to these hard conversations, we can learn quite a bit. And I know that there'll be a help to some people who maybe are in the position Stephen was in not so long ago, feeling the same pressures, struggles, and anxieties that Stephen had. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the episode. Well, thank you so much, Stephen, for hopping on an interview with me. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to kind of start with some of your background and maybe tell me just a little bit about, your experience growing up, and then what that initial introduction to the independent Baptist movement was for you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So I grew up in church. My folks actually left a very strict Baptist church. I didn't know it at the time. I was 5 years old and went to a more very conservative but more community-oriented church for 10 years. So basically from when I was 5 to 15, and have built friends that I still have today. Really healthy place and a healthy group of people.
Okay.
When I was almost 15, I started hearing about a youth group that was just really an exciting place to be. Some of my friends that I went to school with had started going on Wednesday nights and had invited me. And so I decided I was going to go. At this point, my parents just let me, start attending on Wednesday nights. And really, it was an exciting time. Really heard preaching like I had never heard before. I got to experience just an exciting, vibrant ministry with, probably, 10 times the amount of teens that I was normally with, all that had a heart for God, that really had a passion to do something with their lives. And it was very exciting. I mean, it was like probably 80 to 100 kids that met every Wednesday night in the basement of a church that was, not too far from where I was. So,
right. So so as you started getting involved, was the denomination that you were already involved in, was that Independent Baptist as well, or was the youth group kind of the first venture for you, kind of into that world?
Yeah, no, the other church was it was called, it was just a Bible church.
Okay.
Whether or not it was part of any organization, I actually wouldn't be able to tell you. That church doesn't even exist anymore. But I really haven't dug too much into it. There was certainly no politics surrounding it. We didn't really do a ton of things with other churches, and the youth group was just the kids that went to the church there. So yeah, that youth group was the first time I personally had ever experienced it, minus the very slight memories that I have of, church when I was 5 years old, which was
Sure.
very, very few. This was my first dip into the IFB movement,
Right.
and it was extremely exciting.
Definitely. So in the height of that excitement, using just a few words, what would you have described if I was asking you at that time period to describe the IFB movement at the peak of your involvement when things were exciting? What are a couple words you would have used to describe your experience and your connection to it?
Probably the first 4 to 5 years, I would say, again, there was this real fire. There was a camaraderie, satisfaction in believing what I was doing was making a difference. There was a real, coming of age for me kind of happened right at that time, where I was able to get a singular focus in my life, and that felt really good for me. It allowed me to know exactly what I was going to be doing today and tomorrow and into the future, and that was extremely satisfying.
Right. So you said for the first 4 or 5 years that would have been the case, but um, I'm assuming the story doesn't end there. What was kind of the turning point where, and I know we haven't spoken much beforehand, so what was the turning point where you started thinking, something feels off or something's not quite right?
The first uncomfortable moment that I had was I went to Bible college after surrendering to preach, and I came a day early, so I actually was able to stay on the campus. There was probably like 5 people on campus, and I got up the next morning and I sat on the couch and just watched all these people come in. The camaraderie that I thought I had was one that wasn't with any of these people, and realized I was going to have to work my way through the ranks of what was the politics of Bible college. I realized that very quickly. I'm adaptable and was able to kind of find my own way there, in its interesting and kind of twisted political way. But I realized that there was a little bit of difference from what I had come from.
Sure. And just to be clear, what college was this? This was Lancaster, West Coast Baptist College, correct?
Yeah, I went out to West Coast Baptist College. Yeah.
Okay. And was that a as far as location wise, was that a long distance from where you had grown up? Or was
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania,
Okay.
and I was ready to get out of Pittsburgh, and California seemed like a really great place to be.
Yeah,
I
a little
visited
bit of a jump.
Yeah, right. I made sure it's at least 2,000 miles away.
Sure.
So I went out there to visit, had an amazing time, got to meet some really fun people, and decided that I was going to move out there. So I did.
Huh. So the location was obviously a big draw. Was there any, as far as Bible college, was there pressure about Bible college? And then was there a specific person who pushed you specifically toward that college, or was it just something where, you kind of knew that that's what you needed to do and that looked the most appealing when you're looking at a map of all these different options that you had?
Yeah, to be honest, there was never a strong manipulation on what college to go to.
Okay.
We went on a few college tours, and the other ones were just not options.
Sure.
And I visited, I don't even know if any of these exist anymore. Providence Baptist College, Hyles Anderson Baptist College does exist. There's another one in like the Midwest, Ambassador Baptist College. I went to Pensacola was an option, and West Coast was kind of still being started and formed, and there wasn't really much out there, and it was exciting, and
right.
kind of have that forging ahead, pioneering spirit, and I wanted to be a part of that as well.
So what time period would this be for the college? I know you say
I went out there in 2003.
2003. And what was the size, do you think, when you were attending?
There's when I went out there were 600 students, I remember.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, definitely in that starting phase then. So so once you got there, so the first thing you kind of noticed was kind of the political thing. It was having to fight your way for, popularity, or trying to work your way into different cliques.
Yeah, there's just a hierarchy.
Right.
My dad worked in construction.
Okay.
And my mom was a homemaker, and I had never even dipped my toe into what was the IFB subculture of what the world was. And so I went in blind. Like,
right.
This was the big moment of, hey, listen, not everything is as it seems.
Sure.
Like, something is happening and I don't know what it is.
Right.
And I never really got dialed into that. I never really totally found out what that was, and never truly got over my insecurities while I was there,
Okay.
or even serving in ministry.
So did you feel, I guess my question would be, kind of based on what you just said, did you ever get to a point while attending that you felt completely bought in, or was it did that feeling just kind of stayed and lingered and kind of
I was
there the whole
100%
time?
bought in.
Okay.
But there was always that lingering feeling of, I don't deserve to be here.
Right. That lack of self-worth.
I haven't earned that. There's just a little bit more of what I should be doing.
Right.
And that's, I believe, something that's systemic in the movement.
Okay.
I don't know if that might be something that everyone feels.
Right.
It certainly is something that I know other friends of mine have felt and feel.
Right.
But it's certainly something that was not, I never talked about it. Yeah, I can't be literally training to become a pastor and leader and somebody that's going to guide others and reveal that I feel like this is something that's difficult for me. Right.
Yeah, you don't want to show any of that weakness, especially when it is such an environment where performance is so big. So you kind of have this lingering feeling, and this kind of goes into, I didn't send this question ahead of time, but it's something that I'm thinking of. So as I kind of started working toward sharing some of these stories about how to, dissect the movement, dissect some of the leadership, one of the phrases that's just kind of stuck in my mind for my entire life is the phrase preacher boy. And it's probably kind of an inside baseball term, but I think anyone who is in the IFB movement knows what I'm referring to. It's a culture of, it's young people being trained and basically being pushed to live at a higher level and become the next generation of, the quote unquote greats that came before them. And the term where I heard that used the most was actually at West Coast Baptist College. I know they had, preacher boy competitions and all sorts of things like that. And I guess my question would be, you talk about this feeling of not being able to share those insecurities or those doubts or reveal weakness to each other. Do you feel, I know you mentioned it was a systemic issue within the actual movement, but do you feel like that was something that was kind of an unspoken rule that was passed on from the top, or do you think it was something that, that you were kind of, silently taught by the leadership there? Or do you think it's something more that, the people who were drawn there had a, sort of chip on their shoulder of, I have to be the best. And it was almost a competitive thing rather than a growth oriented thing.
I think it could be a combination of all of those
Okay.
that you just mentioned, and probably a few more that we could even think hard and come up with.
Okay.
But yeah, when there's a culture of preaching and teaching and discipleship that drives home that there is literally no higher calling, right? There's
Sure.
no better thing that you could be doing with your life. There's nothing you could spend your time with that is a greater thing than becoming a pastor. That, first of all, okay, if you tell me as a person, if you tell me that, then I want to be that, right? If there's
Right.
no greater thing that I can get to, then heck yes, that's what I want to be. So
Sure.
that's right. That's why I'm here. So if there's a way to become a better leader, a better follower, a better Christian, closer to God, I'm going to figure out how to do that, and I'm in, right?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, there's definitely that, but with the idea of not being able to reveal a weakness, I mean, that's from the very top. There's literally no, the higher you go in any of these churches, they're all independent, right? So you can never
Right.
break down a leadership structure, but go with the church. I mean,
Sure.
you're going to find very, very, very few pastors that would ever go before their church and say that they did something wrong.
Right.
I mean, that is so rare. I mean, and I've talked about it with friends of mine that have left full-time ministry. I've seen men that would rather, and this is the extreme case, men that would rather take their own life
Right.
than go before their ministry and say, I did something wrong.
Yeah.
That is a sick, demented, corrupt place. And it's created in your own mind.
Right.
It's disgusting. However, it exists, right? And so if I know that guy can't say anything that he's ever thought, done, felt, seen, said, I definitely can't.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. No, there's a couple things you said there that I think are interesting, and obviously one being, it's hard. It's hard to have conversations about the independent Baptist movement because it's kind of a juxtaposition of terms. Anyway, you have, it's a movement of churches where it is a denomination, but it's also, they all claim to be independent. So it's hard to, especially when you're talking with someone who's within it, it's hard to say, oh, there's a systemic problem of A, B, or C, because the instant rebuttal is we're independent. So you can't blame me for what
100%
the road does, But the issue is, like you said,
that person off so fast.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot different than approaching any other organization, because you can say, well, the president of the denomination said this. What do you think? Versus, there's kind of this pick and choose. What do I associate with? What do I not? But like you said, within the movement, there is, whether you're in Pittsburgh or whether you're in California, the churches function very similarly, and the problems and the especially issues with leadership are spread out all over the U.S. And so it's just very interesting, and it makes it very hard when you're researching to say, hey, here's the root cause of this issue. Because the minute you start trying to talk to someone on the inside, I'm saying this is someone who was inside of it for almost 20 years, is there's a very difficult conversation because everyone who's within it denies being connected to anything negative. That's when the independent
100%.
card comes out,
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's kind of a perfect setup, and especially when you get into some, of the very serious scandals that have happened, it's a very easy way legally to separate yourself from anything that would look negative. But yeah, I think yeah, you mentioned just a couple things that I've heard it from people all over the place, and they all share that similar feeling of, I felt insecure. I felt like I have a close friend that I've talked to who attended West Coast as well, and he talks about that feeling of you can't reveal that you're struggling with something. And it seems like if there's a place you should be able to reveal something that's weighing on you mentally or especially spiritually, it would be a Christian college or a church setting. And so when you're focusing on something that's more performance based, you start running into a lot of issues that lead to some pretty unpleasant results, especially when that resistance against revealing any weakness goes to the extremes that you mentioned earlier. So as you started noticing this and this kind of started standing out more and more, I know that you attended for a few years. Did you make it to graduation? Did you drop out? Okay.
I graduated from West Coast. I got married while I was there. I wanted to make sure that I had things squared away before I got married. So I had the most important conversations with my wife before we got married, that she believed that the King James Version was the only Bible that our family was going to use. I wanted to make sure that she was going to wear a skirt or a dress when we got married, and that wasn't going to be an issue. And once I got those squared away, I knew I could marry this girl, right?
Right.
My goodness. Thank God that my wife had enough grace to get past my absolute ignorance and, I don't know, allow me to grow.
Right.
We're still married, thank God. We got married while I was still in Bible college. She graduated, and then we got married. So, yeah, I graduated with a pastoral degree. I made sure that I didn't, bail out or skimp out and get a church ministries degree. I made sure I did both or all my semesters of Greek, and made sure I had the best possible, way to get into a good church to make a difference.
Right. So before we move kind of into the church ministry side, you mentioned a couple things that I know for me are, familiar statements, but for someone who's not familiar with this movement and is maybe hearing about it for the first time through some of this content, you mentioned, the importance of her, reading the King James or wearing skirts. What prompted that level of importance for those issues? And, what were some of those things that you considered at the time to be, spiritually speaking, life or death? We don't go past this point if you don't agree with me on these issues.
It's been a while since I've been so dogmatic. So thankfully I've moved on, but kind of thinking back to those times, I was just fully convinced in my own mind that was what was right for me.
Right.
I was fully convinced that it was not just the best translation we had, but the only one we should be using. I was fully convinced that there was a standard for modesty for women that if you didn't adhere to, then it was sin. I was fully convinced that there was a lifestyle that should be lived, that if you didn't, you disqualified yourself from ministry, you would limit yourself in God's eyes, you would lose the power of the Holy Spirit. I mean, there's a lot of riding on getting those things right.
Right. And would you say, obviously, modesty being a huge issue and things, did you feel that there was that there was a higher standard for the women in the college than there was for the men when it came to most of these topics? Or was that something that you felt like everyone kind of had their own set of insane, and now looking back, insane rules or guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, so we'll back up. So back in whatever 2000, early 2000s to mid 2000s, when we went there, I mean, dress code was pretty strict. I know, kind of looking back, I think when we left, the biggest thing that changed was like the ladies didn't have to wear nylons anymore. And like when I went to Bible college, I didn't even know what that word meant.
Right.
But like there was this level of dress code that came from the 1950s and just had been hammered down so long, people thought it was scriptural at some level.
Right.
And I mean, there was always a level of logic in my mind that knew that was all. Like there was always somebody more strict than me that I could say I'm not that, right? Because
Right.
it's independent. I'm not that nuts. But I was at the top of the spectrum. I could point to far more people on the other end than I could more conservative than me.
Right. Well, that's what is kind of the goal, right? Is to be separated and feel like I'm not like the others. I'm not like the outside world. It's that
Well, I mean,
separation thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing. It's the us versus them mentality that these churches / organizations have.
Right.
It's us versus them, period, whatever that is. And you create that. It's very clarifying to somebody that you're leading. However, it's also very dangerous when you lead in a very black and white way like that.
Right.
And to even hear, it was the strangest thing, to hear myself say that almost seems wrong, because there was a point in my life where if it wasn't black and white, then it was wrong.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's no room for any kind of free thought or moving in a direction that doesn't have a clear guideline of this is what we're supposed to do.
100%. And like the word compromise is a cuss word to the IFB movement.
Right. Yeah. No, to compromise is you failed, basically. You've compromised. You lost your values.
100%.
Integrity.
You are an apostate. Yeah.
Do you feel like the guidelines, and this is something that, at least for me growing up in the movement and with all the research that I've done, both within and having left, is I always looked at West Coast as, and I guess in some ways I still do, as a much milder, when you're looking at a list of Hyles-Anderson, Golden State, these colleges, West Coast seems to be, at least now, one of the milder colleges on the spectrum, at least from the outside looking in. But it still has a lot of the weird eccentricities that started back, with guys like Jack Hyles and things like that. Do you feel that there was did you feel any sense of I don't want to put words in your mouth, but did you feel any sense of sinister motives behind the guidelines that they were placing? Did you feel it was a power move, or did you feel that it was something, and maybe this is what you were touching on earlier, do you feel it was something that they had just, the leadership had heard and been taught so long that it was just second nature at that point, and it was just a lot of people who maybe were good people, but were just teaching really bad practice and philosophy? What
two things there. Yeah. There are a lot of great people there.
Right.
That think some really, I mean, I like to think I'm at least half of a good person.
Sure.
Not in myself, but I believe I can live a good life, and I believe there's a lot of good people there. And there's one quote that has rung for so long, and it's a wish from the pastor is a royal command. I don't know if you've ever heard that. It's basically something that you hear over, or I heard personally, and whoever was there with me heard over and over and over and over again, which just was to ingrain the philosophy that the pastor is the boss.
Right.
Period. Like there's one guy, and whatever he says goes.
Right.
And whatever he thinks make happen. Like he could be like smacking his lips like he's thirsty, and you should have a drink for him.
Right.
And that level of attentiveness to one man does something to that one man, that you can't get around that fact. And it feels really good to serve, and it feels really good to be a part of an organization that you believe in. And it feels good to like know, okay, a wish from the pastor is a royal command, and then he makes a wish and you make it happen and he smiles at you, right?
Right.
However that smile looks, whatever that reward is.
Right.
However, there's a flip side to that, right? There's you mess up.
Yeah.
And the hammer that comes down when you mess up is so much more devastating than the reward that comes with serving in a ministry like that. And these ministries are so abusive to the men and women that give their lives to them,
right,
that they literally have nothing when it comes, at the end of the day. And they will use Bible verse to tell them why that's so and why that's good. And when they die and go to heaven, they're going to have riches. But every one of those pastors, right, don't live that out.
Right. And was this phrase, you said you actually, so I've heard variations of that phrase, but it's always been used by people who have left the movement and just are describing what it was like. So you literally heard people use that phrase in a sense that was supposed to make it sound normal, that this is the way that it should.
Oh, 100%. Professors in college classes.
That was my next question. So you were hearing this from leadership, from assistant pastors and professors and things like that. What did you feel like this was something that was kind of mandated by, Paul Chappell for them to say, or do you think it's just something that they went in?
It's a culture. I mean, he doesn't have to mandate it.
But he doesn't stop it from happening.
He rides the wave, right?
Right.
Like, you don't even have to at this point. This has been going on for decades.
Right.
Like far before. So it's like the ball is already rolling. If you can hop on and be like, I feel like half the staff used to be on staff at Hyles-Anderson College at West Coast. So like you can't get around the fact that stuff's ingrained in you.
Right.
Especially when you are in the literal same movement.
Right.
Brand it how you want. It's just a brand.
Yeah. No, there's definitely, I know there's definitely some people, and this is where that, independent conversation comes into play, but I know that there's a lot of staff who can be traced back to Bob Jones or Hyles-Anderson or any, fill in the blank. They all share that same pool of people. Obviously, like I mentioned before, when I say the name Hyles-Anderson College, that name carries a lot more baggage to more people than I think maybe West Coast name does. But
give it time.
Yeah, that might answer some of my question is there's part of me that, with how much crossover there is, it seems strange to me that the image is as sanitized as it is. And I've, my theory about it is that they're better at covering things up than maybe these other places are. Did you feel, as you and friends and staff are working in service of this organization, were you aware of any kind of, cover-ups or things that you felt it was your duty to not talk about because it would tarnish the reputation of the college? Or did you feel like the extent of negative was just like man worship of the leadership? Or was it, again, a mix of both of those things?
So I was on the side of bought in.
Okay.
So I traveled for West Coast for a men's quartet.
Okay.
Like, I literally recruited people to go there.
Okay.
I was fully convinced in my mind that if you wanted to serve God and train for the ministry, this was the place to do it. So my filter for what I would allow through my ear gate was very, very thin, right? There weren't too many particulates going through that filter. So if there was something, my brain probably shut down and just said that couldn't possibly be true.
Yeah. It would just be, oh, that's gossip, or that you're just speaking out of turn, or that's none of our business kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, however, like, now looking back and hearing conversations and knowing conversations that I had with staff, it's more just odd, right? Like,
Right.
no systemic, not that I'm aware of, like, cover-ups of, but there's enough of just like uncomfortableness
Right.
to not want to be a part. And I was having a conversation with my wife today, and while we were dating, I don't remember what it was that we got in trouble about, but we probably were like holding hands, or we had like were rubbing elbows. Quite literally, this is probably what it was. I don't remember. But I know you laugh, but I mean, it was quite literally like you could not touch.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely know. Yeah.
So we might have been engaged, but I don't think so at this point. And we were called to the dean's office, and we were brought in, and the dean of men decide, I don't know. It's just, it's the culture, right? So he goes into a conversation and lets my wife know that during our marriage, that if she wanted to keep me, I would need a high level of stimulation as a man from her. And if she didn't give that to me, then it was going to be very hard to keep me.
Wow.
That's when we were dating.
Yeah.
And like, you sit there in that conversation, and I felt uncomfortable back then, but now listening to how my wife felt in that conversation is pretty disgusting. Like,
right.
It's just not it's not even good advice, let alone like a conversation you should be having.
Yeah. Well, it's bad advice at a bad time. And then when you hear the context of, or the content of what he's saying, he's essentially saying that whatever you choose to do it's her responsibility to stop it. It's on her.
Oh, 100.
And that kind of conversation, and just going back to what you said earlier, that's the stuff that's really weird for me. And it's honestly, this is one of the harder interviews because there's so little public, unlike a Hiles, there's so little public scandal information or things like that have been published that it's very hard. It's all of it is, and even from my experiences with people, it's this like murky, uncomfortable feeling where something more is happening in a situation, but there's no way to put your finger on what exactly is really freaking you out. It's just such a weird environment in general.
Truly, there's such a high level of control on adults that can make their own decisions, but decide to go there and give up every freedom that they got when they were 18. It's just strange, strange environment in general. But that's also, kind of going back to the idea of like levels of ministry or whatever it might be. Like they would train people to be school teachers, and like there was a few, I'm now by happenstance related by 2 marriages to somebody that decided he was going to be a school teacher, got trained at West Coast, and the level of like respect and praise and out in the open and lifting up that differed from those 2 degrees is quite, I mean, it wouldn't even be a secret. Like it wouldn't even be different. But also like he also got just some awfully horrible, probably even wicked advice to leave the girl that he was dating at the time, now married to, because of what she had worn. And really just strange stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And just overreaching, with control, just speaking into things that weren't their responsibility at all. So dealing with this, obviously with your college experience, you went on to graduate, and then I know you had mentioned you went on to serve for almost 9 years with 2 different churches. So, can you talk just a little bit about what that transition was like? Do you feel like things got better? Did things got worse? And then what was kind of the final straw or the boiling point that made you kind of step away from, that culture?
Yeah, I was kind of coming off of a high at West Coast. I mean, I had a good experience, an odd one, but I would say a good experience.
Right.
In emotionally coming off of it.
Right.
So I went into full-time ministry. Looking back, didn't look too much into it. I interviewed with a few pastors. I always thought I'd go back home to Pittsburgh and serve in my home church. At that point, there was no open position. The pastor invited me to come back and serve, but get a job. That wasn't really what I was looking for. Bivocational. I wish I would have, but I went to serve full time in a church north of Philadelphia, and I love serving people. So I love that I got the opportunity to love on people the way that I wanted to when I could, but that was few and far between. There is so much of the pastor's personality projected on that ministry, and I, to my own shame, took too long to realize that. It took me 7 years maybe to work up enough courage to be convinced in my mind that it was wrong. I thought I was bearing the load of pastoral abuse myself.
Okay.
And the biggest thing that kind of opened my eyes, the eye-opening moment, was when I realized it wasn't just me being abused.
Right. And when you say abused, do you mean just your schedule being taken advantage of? Was it overstepping into relationship, or what did that mean in your context?
So there's a level of control that an employer should have.
Okay.
And I allowed my priorities to get out of whack, right? My pastor, my church, my employer, my God, all became rolled into one.
Right.
And everything else came after that, including the relationship with my wife, eventually with my kids. So I allowed that to come first. Certainly there's a level of working too much. I mean, that's right. But like, if you want to be passionate and succeed in life, you work a lot, right? That's not right. Too bad. One time we did another staff member and I did a calculation of how much we made per hour. And it was like less than $4 an hour.
Wow.
Which we did just to like laugh at ourselves and, I don't know, just made light of it. But now looking back, it's like just so horrible and just odd. And not that I'm a money hungry human being, but because we lived on the church property and because we had access to the food bank and the pastor thought that was a benefit of the church, then we didn't make as much because we could go get free food. That's just something strange, but the level of control, the level of verbal abuse that the staff went through at the ministry I was at, I would say it was probably more than most.
Okay.
And that's eventually what I went to the pastor about. I put in my resignation back in 2014, and then after preparing for like 2 or 3 months, went to him and said, "Hey, listen, I believe that you struggle with these things," and he resigned. Actually,
wow, that's surprising.
He went to the deacons. He said, "Hey, listen, this is where I'm at. I'll resign if you want." He resigned and then went to a different church.
Oh, I was almost surprised.
You were almost surprised, right? But
yeah. So essentially, someone pointed out the emperor has no clothes, and they just went to a different town.
Yes, that's 100% what it was. And then they're like, "Okay, I don't need this place. There's plenty more." And now I got all my sermons ready to go. And right. In my sick mind, I for a few months went on both churches' websites and kept matching his reused sermons because just out of therapy for myself. I don't know why I did that, but it's that's pretty systemic as well. Just move people around. That church was never approached with why he left. That church was never asked and like what to do. He just went to a new ministry. So, which is interesting. But during that time, we had three staff guys, and probably 5 or 6 years into it, the person with the most tenure left, and we realized that even though we take a brunt of a lot of just verbal abuse and control, we always could go to this assistant pastor's office and blow off steam.
Right.
It was probably therapeutic for him too. And he was really a buffer between the pastor and the staff and the pastor and the church. He was a great politician. He left, and that buffer was gone. And so the church got more of what the pastor's dysfunction, and the staff did as well. And just the strain, just getting yelled at and having to do pre-staff meetings to navigate what he was going to say, what he was going to yell about, and how we could actually get work done in the ministry was a weekly occurrence.
In spite of the leadership.
Yeah, like the church staff would get together and have a staff meeting to figure out how we were going to present ideas in a way that we could actually accomplish something in an order that we knew what he would blow up on and then what he would actually, kind of bite on.
So you would literally structure it to do the lowest chance of him blowing up in the beginning of the meeting, and then try to move anything that would be volatile to the very end of the meeting.
It was actually more sophisticated than that.
Okay.
It's a human being, but we would basically have these straw man ideas that we knew were not going to work, and kind of in a sophisticated way. And it was always like making sure that he had a good part in the hatching of a new idea that was already totally formulated. Just real manipulative stuff. But it's always what I've found is it's always really easy to manipulate a manipulator. Yeah. And so we really broke down very formulaic how to operate in that ministry, until I realized like other people were being hurt, and I was like, I couldn't stay.
Yeah. And then so you kind of left at the same point that he did, and then just went on to just living your life separated from that? That was kind of that last breath of that movement for you.
Well, I thought it would be. I left that ministry and went back to Pittsburgh. I decided I was going to work under or at the church that I had gotten saved at, or at least resaved, or whatever happened. That ministry was something that I thought was going to be like my breakthrough, and then I realized it's the same stuff.
Right.
Like, I thought it was just that place, just like I thought the abuse was just on me. Then it was other people, and it was like, holy smokes, like this is no different. This is the same place. And the pastor was different. He was not abusive in the same way. However, like, it was the same things. You're talking about the same stuff. You're trying to navigate the same things. And it was actually even more of a step back, navigating through some of the most asinine, ridiculous stuff, from putting words on a screen of the literal hymns you're singing, to, I mean, oh my word, just really ridiculous things. I was there 18 months. And after having 6 meetings with the pastor in 18 months, I resigned. I was like, this is not just one place. This is a movement, and one that I saw in 3 different pastors, 3 different leadership styles, all part of the same type of ministries that are all works-based sanctification ministries.
Right. So now, stepping away from all of that, what does your life look like now as far as recovery process from, your experiences in dealing with, more than a decade of, twisted, mental leaps and, strange abuse patterns and things like that? What has been that process for you, and what's been most helpful for you as you've kind of, separated yourself and tried to, do the self work and, work with your family as you guys kind of move past this chapter?
Thankfully, my wife has been along for that ride. She was very willing to make that move with me, and we made that together and stepped away from ministry together. We decided that we weren't going to believe anything. We were going to choose to start from ground zero of where we were at, to take anything that we had and try to like make it something else. I've just seen that over and over and over and over again. And it's literally just changing a word that I used earlier, the brand, right? I wasn't interested in rebranding my Christianity.
Right.
So it looked different. I wanted it to be different. And so I really took a deep dive into looking at all angles. So I read things on and watched things on atheism. I looked into, and read apologetics on, being an agnostic. I looked into other ways that God has been viewed, past, present, and really wanted to find out if what I had was what I wanted.
Right.
And so and that's what brought me to the gospel of salvation, right, and the gospel of sanctification. And it's really something that we try to at least keep in the forefront of our minds. And I believe this is where this movement gets it wrong. They have a strong belief that the gospel is the power for salvation, but they do not have a belief that the gospel has the power to sanctify a person, and they do not allow somebody the freedom of what that might look like.
Right.
And so we gave ourselves the freedom to look at what our lives would be if we read our Bible when we did, and we went to a church that we felt comfortable in our spirituality, and have been to many churches over the last 4 years. We do go to a church now faithfully. That's even like an IFB word, I guess, but
Yeah.
We go to a church, right? Like, people recognize us there. I text with the pastor every once in a while, right? Like, normal place. And so we went through a process of figuring out where we went wrong. And
Right.
that's what it was. We, for a long time, used behavior modification techniques to try to become something that we were not, and probably should have never been.
Right.
And found peace in the fact that if we were going to change, it was going to be because God wanted us different, not because any man wanted us different.
Right.
And so, and then we decided that once we left the ministry, we would no longer make a single decision because of guilt.
Right.
Which has been a healthy practice for us. We literally, like, if we're deciding to do something, we search our motives, and if it's because we feel guilty, we just won't do it. Even if it's like something you probably should do, like, we just don't do it.
Right.
Because we just did so many things by guilt or through guilt, that it was just not worth making a decision based on that motive.
Right. Yeah, guilt's not a great motivator. It's a quick way to burn out, for sure.
Oh, it's a great motivator. I mean, that's but it does burn out pretty quick.
I guess I should
Adrenaline
say
burns.
unhealthy motivator. It is a good motivator,
Unhealthy.
but an unhealthy motivator for sure. So, yeah, no, I really appreciate you sharing kind of that trajectory, and you may have already answered this. I just have two more questions for you. First, I think you kind of hit on, but if you could say something to someone sitting in the pew of a abusive IFB ministry, and maybe they're scared to leave, or they feel like they're unable to leave or unable to speak out, what would you say to them?
I would say that, like, God loves you so much and is the antithesis of what love is. And if you don't feel loved in the place that you go to worship, or you don't feel like it's a place that you can express love in a godly way, then search why. Right? Like, fear is something that causes us to freeze, to stumble, but it's also something that allows us to really figure out some things. And just if you are fearful, right, figure out why, and then find out, like, why you are not motivated by something higher, because once you are, it's so stinking freeing. And relearning this is something that's good for us, because I am not great at it, but expressing unconditional love to those that are around you just because is, like, pretty magnificent and extremely godly, and has changed the way that we make decisions when we choose to live that way. And it's pretty amazing.
Love that answer. And this kind of ties hand in hand. I know that we spoke earlier in the conversation about, there being, there's definitely some issues that are deeply rooted within the movement. There's, even a lot of present leadership that have some of the biggest churches and establish some of the weird rules and regulations and problems that you see arise. Those things all exist, but there are we mentioned there are some good people that are stuck within a messy situation. But looking at the systemic issues, looking at the IFB movement as a whole, is there hope for a reform of that movement, or do you feel it's a movement that needs to just, be put to rest and, find, people should find other paths outside of it? What do you think? Do you think there's hope for reform of that movement, or do you think it's past that point?
Well, I mean, by me leaving, I think is my answer to that. I don't think there is any hope for it whatsoever.
Okay.
It's very foundational truths of practice, not doctrine, but practice, are so just strange. And any ministry that I've seen that is doing it differently, that still would fellowship, are so rare that they have very little influence.
Exactly.
There's always like a little glimmer of hope, or like you hear of these churches that are like, "Ooh, yeah, but they don't." But then you see them, and there's like maybe some weird connection, and it's like, why? I just don't understand. And they can always just claim the independence of it, but for me, there's no reason for me to fellowship with somebody, not be kind with, but like fellowship and allow influence to those that I love, that I disagree with fundamentally.
Right.
And I just don't see anybody bold enough to say, listen, I'm just not that. And if you're not that, you're not, right? Like, there's so many people trying to rebrand. There's so many people saying, oh, well, we don't tell our congregation what to wear now. It's like, what do you mean now? Like you used to? Like, why were you telling everybody in the first place, right? Like, that's odd.
It's kind of just repainting a broken building. Like at a certain point, you just kind of have to demolish and rebuild something better.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, we've seen some growth. Well, what growth? Well, we've brought some new songs into our church. Oh, where'd they come from? Well, they were written 40 years ago instead of 60 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, literally, those are the strides that are happening now.
Right.
So if it's just not worth it for the individual to stay in a ministry like that.
Yeah.
And if people realize that there are fantastic God-led ministries out there that are doing great works that they've never been told about because they're in such a small community, which that's what we realized, then they really should just leave. Like, there's just no reason to stay. It's not going to die, right? There's always going to be a small vein of what is this kind of pseudo religion and pseudo Baptist culture. But the smaller it gets, the better, because it's not a healthy organization.
Right. Well, thank you so much for, again, sharing that story and the insights. I love, over the past couple of days, I kind of announced this project. I've gotten to talk to a lot of different viewpoints and people from all over that have, kind of shared their position and their, kind of what their observation is. And I really appreciate you taking time to share yours. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are in similar positions to what you saw yourself in. So I really appreciate your answers. Is there anything else before we end the conversation? Is there anything else that you'd like to say that maybe wasn't asked or that you think is important to get out? Or do you feel like we've kind of covered the gamut of what you would share?
I mean, I would, especially because of the theme of what the culture that you're trying to maybe expose or kind of reveal, whatever it might be, to those that listen that maybe are just curious that they're probably not supposed to be listening.
I'm sure there will be a lot of those.
Which is fantastic. Good for you, right? However, the more and more I speak to men that have been in ministry or that still are and trying to do the ministry thing, the more I talk to people that have gone into extremely, extremely deep depression, which is an extremely dangerous and place to be. And I would say it's extremely normal if you work in ministry in these churches to get there. In fact, I've spoken to a few of my very closest friends, and to where we've allowed ourselves to get to the point where we considered, is it better to take my own life or continue in ministry? That's a dark, and I'm a pretty strong person, I feel.
Right.
And if I can get there, I know somebody else is considering that. And it's usually because of hidden sin, because
Right.
it's so pounded into you that there's some things that are so wrong. And I would say, like, with anything that, like, it's just not worth it to harm yourself and those that are around you by not seeking help by somebody that you know will help you. And that might not be your pastor, it might not be anybody at your church, but, like, please, whatever you do, like, get help and, like, seek somebody that's gonna love you or professionally help you.
Yeah, I love that. That's super, super important. And I think that's something that I know for me, like, that's something that's very hard to talk about when you're in something like that and you don't feel like there's anyone to talk to. But finding someone that you can talk to is really important. And it's just removing yourself from that unhealthy environment. If you feel like that, then there's something wrong with the environment. It's not. It's the culture tells you that that's you. If you feel like that, that's you. You're not strong enough. You're not pushing hard enough. You're not, faithful enough. You're not spiritual enough. But the truth is, if you're in a situation where, doing something that should be a exciting and, spiritually fulfilling and emotionally fulfilling thing, if you constantly feel like that, then there's something wrong with that environment, and it's probably not what it's being advertised to be. So I really appreciate you sharing that as well. That's a great thing to add and to close out on. So Stephen, thank you so much once again for hopping on the call. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you this is the first recorded interview, so I appreciate you being a guinea pig of sorts for this one. But I really appreciate the conversation and, getting your perspective. And thank you so much for hopping on.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Eric.